As he approached, he saw the gang's bikes lined up outside, their engines still warm. Thomas parked his truck quietly down the road and slipped into the shadows, his movements deliberate and precise. The bikers had no idea their every move was being watched, every angle calculated. Inside, Razor had just crossed a line, leaning too close to Emma and laughing when she flinched. Thomas stepped through the side door, his presence unnoticed at first. But when his voice cut through the air, steady and commanding, the gang froze. "That's enough," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. All eyes turned to him as he stepped into the light, and for the first time, the bikers realized they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than they had imagined. The room fell silent as Thomas stepped forward, his steady gaze locking onto Razor. For a moment, the gang hesitated, thrown off by the quiet authority radiating from the man they had underestimated. Razor recovered quickly, smirking as he folded his arms. "Who do you think you are? Old man," he sneered. "Just a mechanic trying to play tough." Thomas didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said calmly, the edge in his tone sharper than any blade. Just as Razor was about to retort, the faint sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, but Razor waved it off, convinced it was a coincidence. "Nice try," he said, pointing at Thomas. "But we're not scared of some small-town cops." That's when the second twist hit. The sirens weren't coming for backup. They were a distraction. Outside, a second group of bikers roared onto the scene. Only this time, they weren't Razor's men. They were part of a rival gang Thomas had once crossed paths with during his Navy days, and they owed him a favor. The rival gang had no love for Razor's crew, and now, with Thomas's quiet orchestration, the two groups were about to clash. Razor's cocky smirk faltered as he heard the sound of the new arrivals revving their engines just outside. Thomas turned to Emma, his voice low and steady. "Stay behind me," he said, his eyes never leaving Razor. The tension in the room was electric, every second stretching into an eternity as the pieces of Thomas's plan began to fall into place. The gang was cornered, the stakes higher than ever, and for the first time, Razor realized he might have miscalculated. But Thomas wasn't done yet. This was his battlefield now, and he was just getting started. The air was thick with tension as the rival gang pulled up, their presence instantly shifting the balance of power. Razor's men exchanged nervous glances, their bravado fading under the weight of an enemy they weren't prepared for. Razor, however, tried to mask his unease, barking orders to his crew to hold their ground. Thomas stood firm, his calm demeanor unwavering. "You've got two choices," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Walk away now or face the consequences of your own making." For a moment, it seemed like Razor might stand down, but his pride wouldn't let him. He stepped forward, pointing a finger at Thomas. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? Well, I've got my own surprises." Just as Razor's men reached for their weapons, a deafening honk sounded from the road. Floodlights illuminated the scene as a convoy of trucks rolled in, another call Thomas had made earlier. These weren't just any trucks. They belonged to a group of veterans Thomas had worked with over the years, men who owed him favors and were more than ready to back him up. The bikers froze, their confidence crumbling as they realized they were hopelessly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Razor tried to rally his men, but it was too late. The rival gang and Thomas's reinforcements closed in, forcing Razor's crew to surrender. As the chaos settled, Razor was forced to face Thomas one-on-one. "You got lucky," Razor spat, his confidence broken but his arrogance intact. Thomas stepped closer, his voice steady. "This wasn't luck. This was strategy. You underestimated the wrong man. But just as Razor seemed to accept defeat, Emma stepped forward. In her hand was a recording device she'd been hiding the entire time. And now, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her, "We have everything we need to make sure you don't try this again." The final twist left Razor speechless. The police, already tipped off by Thomas, arrived moments later, and with Emma's recording, they had all the evidence they needed to shut Razor's gang down for good. As the last of the bikers were led away, Thomas looked at Emma, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You did good," he said, his voice soft. Emma smiled, finally feeling the weight lift. Together, they had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. As the last of the flashing lights faded into the distance, the quiet hum of the small town returned. The garage stood under the soft glow of its overhead lights, looking just as it always had, but now it carried the weight of a battle won. Emma leaned against the workbench, her hands still trembling slightly as she replayed the night's events in her mind. Thomas walked over, his steady presence a comforting reminder of the strength that had guided them through. "You handled yourself well," he said, giving her a rare but genuine smile. "I always knew you were tough, but tonight you proved it." Emma smiled back, the bond between them stronger than ever. "I learned from the best," she said. The next morning, life at the garage returned to normal. Customers came and went, unaware of the storm that had passed. But for Thomas and Emma, it was a reminder of what they were capable of when they stood together. The town was safer, and they knew they could handle whatever came next.